Power is enough to make Pokémon grow to unimaginable sizes, but what would happen if Eternatus regained its full strength? Would the entire Pokémon world be reshaped? Would every Pokémon be forced into a permanent transformation, altered by a power that was never meant to exist? And here's a darker possibility. What if Eternatus isn't the only one? The Pokémon world has encountered alien creatures before Pokémon that arrive from space, beings that don't follow the laws of nature. If Eternatus fell to Earth, spreading its influence across Galar, where did it come from? Could there be other creatures like Eternatus, drifting through space, waiting for the right moment to land on another planet and restart the cycle? This would mean the Pokémon world isn't just shaped by natural evolution, mythical gods, and human experiments. It's also home to ancient, unknowable entities, creatures so powerful that they don't fit within the traditional Pokémon battle framework. These beings are not Pokémon as we understand them. They are forces of nature, remnants of something older, something that existed long before trainers, Pokéballs, or even the idea of capturing Pokémon. And if Eternatus is just one of these entities, then the Pokémon world might still be living in the shadow of something far worse, something that hasn't arrived yet. The Pokémon world is full of myths and legends, stories passed down through generations explaining the world's origins and its inhabitants. But beneath the familiar tales of creation and legendary battles are stranger, more unsettling mysteries, suggesting the world has been shaped by forces beyond what most trainers will ever realize. One of the strangest is the mystery of the original Dragona creature that no longer exists, but whose influence may still be felt across the Unova region. In Pokémon Black and White, players are introduced to Reshiram and Zekrom, legendary Pokémon representing opposing forces of truth and ideals. Later, in Pokémon Black 2 and White 2, a third dragon, Kyurem, is revealed. However, what makes Kyurem different is that it's incomplete, a broken shell of something greater, a Pokémon that seems to be waiting for something to restore it. This raises a disturbing question. If Kyurem is incomplete, what happened to the rest of it? The answer lies in an ancient legend from Unova's history. According to in-game lore, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem were once a single entity, a massive dragon embodying balance, not fully aligned with truth or ideals, but existing before these concepts split. At some point, this dragon was torn apart and divided into three beings. Reshiram and Zekrom became powerful, legendary Pokémon, while Kyurem was left behind a husk of the original dragon, losing its identity, power, and sense of self. This changes the way we view legendary Pokémon. Normally, legendaries are seen as complete beings with defined purposes, but Kyurem feels different. It was never meant to exist in its current form, a remnant of something greater lost to time. This explains Kyurem's strange abilities. Lacking its true identity, it temporarily fuses with either Reshiram or Zekrom, partially restoring what it once was. But even in these fused states, it remains incomplete, still missing something lost forever. This raises an even bigger question. If the original dragon once existed, what or who tore it apart? Did this division occur naturally, or was it caused by an external force? Some fans believe it was a result of a conflict between two ancient heroes, a war that split the Unova kingdom in half. But what if the division wasn't caused by humans? What if something even more powerful, something unseen, intentionally broke the original dragon? This idea makes Unova's history even more mysterious. Unlike other regions with clear creation myths involving Pokémon gods, Unova's past is filled with gaps, hinting at events far more complex than what's recorded. The original dragon's existence suggests that the balance of the Pokémon world may not be as stable, as it seems that even legendary Pokémon are not immune to destruction, and that there may be other forgotten beings who suffered similar fates. If this has happened before, what's stopping it from happening again? Could other Pokémon have been whole once, only to be torn apart, scattered into multiple beings, or reduced to hollow shells like Kyurem? If the original dragon could be destroyed, does that mean there are forces strong enough to break even the most powerful Pokémon? The legend of the original dragon isn't just a story, it's a warning. It tells us that even the strongest beings in the Pokémon world are not invincible. that balance can be shattered, and some Pokémon may not be what they seem. The project initially aimed to explore genetic modification, artificial evolution, and Pokémon that were created rather than caught in the wild. While the project was ultimately abandoned, some of its design ideas were preserved. One such idea was a creature resembling Eternatus, a powerful, armored Pokémon meant to result from forced evolution instead of natural growth. When the project ended, most of the designs were lost, but Eternatus' concept survived. Its design was reworked to fit into the Gold and Silver games, with its origin rewritten to reflect a natural evolution from Pupitar rather than being artificially created. This shift explains Eternatus' somewhat disconnected lore, as it's depicted as a destructive force, yet little is said about its interactions with other Pokémon or its place in the ecosystem, reflecting its original artificial nature. This recycling of abandoned concepts is a common practice in Pokémon's development. Many Pokémon that seem to fit a specific generation were actually conceived years before and repurposed when the opportunity arose. For instance, Shellos and Gastrodon, which debuted in Diamond and Pearl, were initially designed for Ruby and Sapphire. Though regional variations were planned, hardware limitations prevented their inclusion, and the idea was shelved until later. Similarly, Leafeon was originally conceived for Gold and Silver, but due to balance concerns, the concept was discarded until it resurfaced in Diamond and Pearl. Likewise, Rhypharia, intended for Generation 2, only appeared in Generation 4. These hidden aspects of Pokémon history illustrate the long development process, where many ideas are iterated and adapted over years. While some designs are used right away, others wait for the perfect moment. Some Pokémon we recognize today might have originally had entirely different purposes and backstories. Behind the scenes, Pokémon designs can undergo major transformations, even switching concepts completely before being finalized. In some cases, these changes are subtle, but others are so drastic that they could have drastically altered the series. For example, Blaziken, known today as a fiery warrior bird, was originally conceived as a feline, resembling big cats rather than a humanoid bird. Initially, Game Freak was experimenting with more animalistic starter Pokémon, but as development continued, they decided a bird-based fire type would better contrast with the reptilian Sceptile and amphibious Swampert. Thus, the feline version was scrapped in favor of the martial artist bird we know today. Not all unused designs are discarded though. Many are repurposed in later generations. One clear example is Garchomp, whose early design resembled a sleek, serpent-like creature rather than a dragon. Elements of this design were later used in Mega Garchomp, bringing back some of the earlier features. Venusaur also underwent a dramatic transformation. Early designs showed it as a reptilian creature, more like a lizard or dragon, but later it was reshaped into the amphibian-like design seen in red and blue, emphasizing the balance between plant and animal traits. Even today, its early reptilian influences are visible in its original sprites. Pikachu, the franchise's mascot, was also nearly different in its initial design. Originally, it was a small, chubby rodent with a different tail shape and a more neutral expression. It wasn't until the development team noticed the popularity of cute, round characters that Pikachu's design was refined into the beloved version we know today. In the early days of Pokémon, there was a significant shift in design direction, especially with the mascot Pikachu. Initially, the character had a different look, but the creators decided to make it more lively and expressive, with its signature smile and lightning bolt tail. This change was specifically made to attract a broader audience, and had it not been made, the entire branding of Pokémon could have taken a very different path. However, Pikachu's redesign isn't the only instance of drastic changes during development. Many Pokémon have had evolutions scrapped, such as Raichu's lost evolution, Gachu. Initially, Pikachu was intended to have 3 evolutionary stages instead of just 2, with Gachu as its final form. This design featured large fangs and horns, giving it a much more aggressive look than Raichu. Ultimately, Game Freak decided to scrap it because they felt it was too visually overwhelming and would disturb Pikachu's role as a mascot. As a result, Gachu never appeared in later games, making it one of the most mysterious Pokémon. The Pokémon world is filled with hidden designs and unused concepts, some of which were erased, while others resurfaced in later generations. This cycle of reinvention means some of the Pokémon we see today may actually be remnants of ideas from decades ago, coming back when the time is right. Pokémon evolve not just within the games, but during their creation too. Some of the most interesting examples come from Pokémon that were planned, designed, and even programmed into early games, but were never meant to be found by players. These are known as lost Pokémon, creatures that exist in the game's data, but were never meant to be discovered. One of the most well-known of these is Missing No, a glitch Pokémon in the original Pokémon Red and Blue. Most fans recognize it as a strange block of pixels that appears when the game's code is manipulated, but what many don't realize is that Missing No wasn't just an error. It occurred because Game Freak had originally planned for more Pokémon than the final 151, leaving gaps in the game's data, which were later filled with random, corrupted information. Missing No could appear in different forms, such as a block of pixels, an Aerodactyl fossil, or a Kabutops skeleton, which suggests it might have once been tied to actual planned Pokémon that were never completed. There were other examples of erased Pokémon as well. In the beta versions of Pokémon Gold and Silver, dozens of unused designs were discovered, many of which never made it to the final release. One of the most unusual was Beta Girafarig, a much darker version of the Pokémon we know today. Instead of having a small second head on its tail, Beta Girafarig had a full-size duplicate of its own body, creating a strange two-headed creature. This design was eventually reworked into the current Girafarig, suggesting that Game Freak initially intended for the Pokémon to have a more eerie look. Another scrap Pokémon from this period was Katora, a small electric tiger cub that was meant to evolve into Kerr and later into Rora. These evolutions were completely cut from Gold and Silver, even though their sprites and Pokédex entries were already designed. Elements of Katora seem to resurface years later in Luxray, implying that even if a Pokémon is removed, its concept can still influence future designs. Perhaps the most intriguing lost Pokémon is the missing Generation 2 evolution of Ditto. In the beta data of Pokémon Gold and Silver, an unnamed pink amorphous Pokémon was found, believed to be intended as an evolution of Ditto. This raises many questions about how Ditto's transformation abilities might have evolved, whether it would have been able to permanently copy other Pokémon instead of temporarily. Since the Pokémon was never fully developed, we may never know. These lost Pokémon aren't just fascinating remnants of game development. They remind us that the world of Pokémon is always evolving behind the scenes, with ideas constantly being created, discarded, and repurposed across multiple generations. Some Pokémon were erased before players ever got to see them, while others remain as corrupted data, glitches that were never meant to be encountered. Yet, even these lost Pokémon have become legends in their own right, proving that in a world that appears meticulously designed, there will always be hidden surprises. Is this conversation helpful so far? For years, fans have speculated about the hidden connections within the Pokémon world. Some theories are based on unusual Pokédex entries, game mechanics, or design similarities that seem too deliberate to be coincidental. One of the most enduring mysteries is the link between Ditto and Mewtwo Pokémon that seem unrelated but share striking similarities. Both weigh 8 pounds, have a pinkish purple color, can transform into any Pokémon, and have the same base stat total of 300, evenly distributed across all stats. What's most suspicious is that Ditto is often found in areas associated with Mewtwo's creation, such as the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island, where genetic experiments on Mew took place. This has led to the theory that Ditto is a failed clone of Mew. This idea fits with the backstory of Mewtwo's creation. Scientists attempted to create a stronger version of Mew, but the result was a more aggressive and unstable Pokémon. What if multiple cloning attempts were made, with each failure resulting in Ditto a simple creature, with the ability to transform but lacking Mew's intelligence and power? While Game Freak has never officially confirmed this theory, they've also never denied it. Ditto's gelatinous body could be the result of incomplete cloning, where only Mew's transformation ability was replicated, but not its full form. If true, Ditto might not be just a regular Pokémon, but a biological remnant of some of Pokémon's most unethical experiments. Ditto isn't the only Pokémon with a mysterious backstory suggesting artificial origins. Porygon, for example, was explicitly created by humans. Unlike Ditto or Mewtwo, Porygon wasn't a biological experiment. It was the first Pokémon made entirely from computer code, existing as a digital life form before being given a physical body. Porygon is unique because it wasn't naturally evolved. It was designed for a specific purpose. According to the Pokédex, Porygon can travel through cyberspace and access computer systems, suggesting it was created to interface with technology, perhaps as an experiment in artificial intelligence. However, Porygon's origins are unclear. There's no known creator or reason for giving it a physical form. What's more puzzling is that Porygon evolves, even though programs don't evolve like living organisms. Porygon evolves into Porygon 2 and Porygon Z, which raises the question, did Porygon develop beyond its original programming? Did it somehow gain organic properties, allowing it to evolve naturally, or did its creators make an unexpected update? Porygon's mystery is further deepened by the fact that it's one of the only Pokémon permanently banned from the anime after an episode caused real-world seizures in hundreds of children. Game Freak has distanced itself from Porygon, making its origins even more mysterious. Between Ditto's possible genetic history and Porygon's unexplained creation, Pokémon has repeatedly introduced creatures that blur the line between natural evolution and artificial design. Some Pokémon might be failed experiments, others might have evolved beyond their original purpose, and some may even be forgotten technology. As the Pokémon world expands, the question remains, how many of these artificial Pokémon are truly alive, and how many are just remnants of human interference? Some Pokémon have obvious origins, inspired by real-world animals, myths, or folklore, while others have hidden mysteries in their design's subtle details suggesting there's more to them than meets the eye. One of the strangest examples is Unknown, a Pokémon that seems simple on the surface, resembling alphabetic letters and appearing in ancient ruins. But what if Unknown is more than just a collection of symbols? What if it has a deeper connection to the very fabric of the Pokémon world? According to Pokémon lore, Unknown has existed since ancient times, long before modern civilization, and is often found in ruins linked to mysterious forces. Even stranger, Unknown behaves differently from other Pokémon. It doesn't act like most creatures that can be trained. Do you like this personality? Unknown, after being encountered in battles and evolving, remains mostly passive. It doesn't grow stronger or interact meaningfully with other Pokémon, yet it is one of the few creatures known to influence reality. This is most notably seen in the movie Pokémon 3, where a swarm of Unknown distorts the world around them, turning imagination into reality. They manipulate time and space, create an entire mansion, and even bring to life a version of Entei from the thoughts of a child. Although the movies don't always align with the game lore, this concept isn't entirely fictional. In the games, the ruins of Alph hint that Unknown possesses a hidden power connected to something far greater. An interesting point is that Unknown seems linked to legendary Pokémon, particularly Arceus. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, if you bring Arceus to the Sinjoh ruins, Unknown appears in swarms around it as Arceus creates a new legendary Pokémon. This moment suggests that Unknown might not just be strange, letter-like creatures, but possibly fragments of Arceus's power scattered throughout the world. This idea is strengthened by the fact that Unknown doesn't appear in the wild like other Pokémon. It only emerges in ancient ruins, places seemingly made to contain it. If Unknown were just another Pokémon species, why does it act so differently? Why is it connected to forgotten history, only found in locations with significant ties to something larger? Unlike other Pokémon, which evolve, grow stronger, or have clear interactions with their surroundings, Unknown does none of these things. It seems to exist outside the standard Pokémon rules, as though it was never meant to be a typical Pokémon. If Unknown is indeed connected to Arceus, it could explain its strange nature. Arceus is said to have created the Pokémon universe, shaping time, space, and existence. But what if it didn't do this alone? What if Unknown is a leftover from that creation, a fragment of a greater force that once had the power to shape reality but is now scattered and forgotten. This theory also explains why Unknown is always found in ruins. If it's a remnant of something ancient, tied to the world's origins, then perhaps these ruins aren't just old structures, but places where reality itself is thinner, where the line between our world and something greater is fragile. Maybe Unknown is still trying to fulfill its original purpose, but without direction, it remains dormant, waiting for a reason to activate. If this is true, then what would happen if Unknown were fully awakened? Would it regain its lost abilities? Would it once again become a force capable of reshaping the world? Or are these just echoes of something that no longer exists? Remnants of a time before time, forever waiting in ruins long forgotten. Some Pokémon are clearly designed to be powerful, with their appearance and lore reinforcing their status as forces to be reckoned with. Others, however, may seem weak at first glance, but hide dark, unsettling secrets. These are Pokémon that, upon closer inspection, become far more disturbing. One such case is Yamask, a ghost-type Pokémon with a backstory that raises troubling questions about death in the Pokémon world. According to its Pokédex entry, the mask Yamask carries is the face it had when it was alive. This means Yamask was once human, and in the Pokémon world, humans don't simply die, they can transform into Pokémon. This raises profound questions. Are all ghost-type Pokémon former humans? How many spirits in the Pokémon world were once trainers or people who still remember their past lives? The strangeness deepens when you consider that Yamask retains its memories of being human. Some Pokédex entries describe it mourning its past life, occasionally looking at its mask and weeping. This suggests that, even in its new form, Yamask keeps its emotions and sense of self. But if Yamask was once human, what about Cofagrigus, its evolved form? Does evolution erase its memories? Or is Cofagrigus still aware, trapped in a body that exists solely to hunt and consume grave robbers? Yamask isn't the only Pokémon with a disturbing backstory. Another example is Phantump, a ghost, grass-type Pokémon, said to be the spirit of a child who got lost in the forest and never found their way out. Unlike Yamask, which carries proof of its human past, Phantump is a lost soul that possesses a tree stump and wanders aimlessly. It's said to mimic the voices of children to lure others deeper into the woods, which may cause more children to get lost, potentially creating more Phantump. This pattern continues. Pokémon is something unpredictable and artificial that has moved beyond its original purpose and is now evolving independently. The idea that Rotom could be more than just a simple ghost-type Pokémon challenges how we view the Pokémon world. It suggests that technology and Pokémon aren't separate, and over time they could merge in unexpected ways. If Rotom is capable of taking over machines indefinitely, who's to say it hasn't already? How much of the Pokémon world remains organic? And how much has already been altered by something we barely understand? There are wild Pokémon, Pokémon born from eggs, and Pokémon created by humans, but some Pokémon seem to have origins that don't quite make sense. These creatures appear to have simply appeared without any explanation of where they came from or how they function. One of the strangest examples is Spiritomb, a ghost and dark-type Pokémon made up of 108 souls sealed inside an odd keystone as punishment for terrible deeds. If Unknown is indeed connected to Arceus, it could explain its strange nature. Arceus is said to have created the Pokémon universe, shaping time, space, and existence. But what if it didn't do this alone? What if Unknown is a leftover from that creation, a fragment of a greater force that once had the power to shape reality but is now scattered and forgotten? This theory also explains why Unknown is always found in ruins. If it's a remnant of something ancient, tied to the world's origins, then perhaps these ruins aren't just old structures, but places where reality itself is thinner, where the line between our world and something greater is fragile. Maybe Unknown is still trying to fulfill its original purpose, but without direction, it remains dormant, waiting for a reason to activate. If this is true, then what would happen if Unknown were fully awakened? Would it regain its lost abilities? Would it once again become a force capable of reshaping the world? Or are these just echoes of something that no longer exists? Remnants of a time before time, forever waiting in ruins long forgotten. Some Pokémon are clearly designed to be powerful, with their appearance and lore reinforcing their status as forces to be reckoned with. Others, however, may seem weak at first glance, but hide dark, unsettling secrets. These are Pokémon that, upon closer inspection, become far more disturbing. One such case is Yamask, a ghost-type Pokémon with a backstory that raises troubling questions about death in the Pokémon world. According to its Pokédex entry, the mask Yamask carries is the face it had when it was alive. This means Yamask was once human, and in the Pokémon world, humans don't simply die, they can transform into Pokémon. This raises profound questions. Are all ghost-type Pokémon former humans? How many spirits in the Pokémon world were once trainers or people who still remember their past lives? The strangeness deepens when you consider that Yamask retains its memories of being human. Some Pokédex entries describe it mourning its past life, occasionally looking at its mask and weeping. This suggests that, even in its new form, Yamask keeps its emotions and sense of self. But if Yamask was once human, what about Cofagrigus, its evolved form? Does evolution erase its memories? Or is Cofagrigus still aware, trapped in a body that exists solely to hunt and consume grave robbers? Yamask isn't the only Pokémon with a disturbing backstory. Another example is Phantump, a ghost, grass-type Pokémon, said to be the spirit of a child who got lost in the forest and never found their way out. Unlike Yamask, which carries proof of its human past, Phantump is a lost soul that possesses a tree stump and wanders aimlessly. It's said to mimic the voices of children to lure others deeper into the woods, which may cause more children to get lost, potentially creating more Phantump. This pattern continues. Pokémon is something unpredictable and artificial that has moved beyond its original purpose and is now evolving independently. The idea that Rotom could be more than just a simple ghost-type Pokémon challenges how we view the Pokémon world. It suggests that technology and Pokémon aren't separate, and over time they could merge in unexpected ways. If Rotom is capable of taking over machines indefinitely, who's to say it hasn't already? How much of the Pokémon world remains organic, and how much has already been altered by something we barely understand? There are wild Pokémon, Pokémon born from eggs, and Pokémon created by humans, but some Pokémon seem to have origins that don't quite make sense. These creatures appear to have simply appeared without any explanation of where they came from or how they function. One of the strangest examples is Spiritomb, a ghost and dark-type Pokémon made up of 108 souls sealed inside an odd keystone as punishment for terrible deeds. This raises unsettling questions. Who were these spirits? Were they once human? And if so, what did they do to deserve being trapped inside a single Pokémon? Unlike other ghost types that are usually individual spirits, Spiritomb is a fusion of multiple souls, a mass of consciousnesses combined into one existence. The fact that a Pokémon can be made from several souls also hints at something darker. Can Pokémon absorb human spirits? If Spiritomb is made up of 108 souls, where did those souls come from? Were they just wandering spirits? Or were they taken from living people, their identities erased as they became part of something else? This isn't the only Pokémon with a seemingly unnatural origin. Another unsettling example is Froslas, a ghost and ice-type Pokémon based on the Japanese spirit of the snow woman, Yuki Onna. According to the Pokédex, Froslas was created when a woman lost in the mountains froze to death, her soul becoming this Pokémon. This is one of the rare cases where a human-to-Pokémon transformation is explicitly mentioned, suggesting that under certain circumstances, a person can become a Pokémon after death. This raises terrifying questions for the Pokémon world. If humans can turn into Pokémon, how many of today's Pokémon were once people? Are ghost types just the most obvious examples? Or can this apply to other Pokémon as well? Take Kadabra, for example. Its Pokédex entry in Pokémon Fire Red states that it was once a human child who woke up transformed into a Pokémon. This implies that people, in some rare cases, can become Pokémon while still alive, not just after death. But this contradicts much of what we know about the Pokémon world. If Pokémon and humans are separate species, then why do transformations like this occur? Is it a random event, or is there an unknown force behind it? Even stranger is Yveltal, the legendary Pokémon associated with death. Unlike most legendaries, which represent elements or concepts like time and space, Yveltal's entire existence revolves around absorbing life energy. When it reaches the end of its lifespan, it doesn't simply die, it steals the life force from everything around it, turning ecosystems into barren wastelands before sealing itself away to regenerate. This suggests that in the Pokémon world, life energy can be absorbed, transferred, or even stolen. This could explain why certain Pokémon, like Spiritomb, can contain multiple souls, while others, like Frostlass, retain their human identities after transformation. It also raises the question of how many Pokémon aren't what they seem. How many creatures in the Pokémon world were once something else entirely, only to be reshaped into a new form that hides their original existence? And if Pokémon can transform from human souls, what happens when a Pokémon dies? Does it simply fade away, or does its spirit linger, waiting for another chance to return? Could Pokémon be stuck in an endless cycle, shifting between forms, with their past identities slowly fading as they become something new? The Pokémon world is full of eerie gaps in logic, where the line between human, Pokémon, and spirit becomes blurry. The more you examine these strange, unexplained transformations, the more you start to question how many Pokémon are truly just Pokémon, and how many were something else before. Some Pokémon feel like they belong in nature, like they've always been part of the world, evolving alongside the environment, just like real animals. But then there are others that seem out-of-place creatures that appear too strange, too unnatural, as if they weren't meant to exist in this world at all. One of the best examples of this is Deoxys, a Pokémon that isn't just rare, but completely alien. Deoxys came from space, its body formed from a mutated space virus exposed to mysterious energy. Pokémon is something unpredictable, an artificial creation that has drifted from its original purpose and is now evolving independently. The idea that Rotom could be more than just a simple, ghostly entity changes our perspective on the Pokémon world. It implies that technology and Pokémon are not separate, and over time, they might merge in unexpected ways. If Rotom can indeed take over machines permanently, who's to say it hasn't already done so? How much of the Pokémon world is still natural, and how much has been altered by forces we hardly understand? There are Pokémon that exist in the wild, those born from eggs, and those created by humans. But then there are Pokémon whose origins are completely mysterious creatures that seem to have appeared with no explanation for how they came to be or how they function. One strange example is Spiritomb, a ghost, dark-type Pokémon that is essentially a fusion of spirits trapped in a single entity. Spiritomb is made up of 108 souls sealed in a keystone as punishment for evil deeds, raising unsettling questions. Who were these spirits? Were they once human? And if so, what did they do to deserve such a fate? Unlike other ghost Pokémon, which are typically individual spirits, Spiritomb is a combination of multiple souls, a swirling mass of consciousness bound together. The idea that a Pokémon could be created from several souls suggests something darker. Could Pokémon absorb human spirits? If Spiritomb consists of 108 spirits, where did they come from? Were they wandering ghosts? Or were they taken from living people, their identities erased as they merged into something else? Another unnerving case is Frostlass, a ghost, ice-type based on the Japanese Yuki Onna, a snow woman spirit. The Pokédex states that Frostlass was created when a woman, lost in the mountains, froze to death and her soul transformed into a Pokémon. This is one of the few instances in the series where the transformation from human to Pokémon is explicitly stated, meaning that under certain conditions, a person can become a Pokémon after death. This raises terrifying questions for the Pokémon world. If humans can turn into Pokémon, how many Pokémon today were once human? Are ghost types the most obvious examples of this? Or can this happen to other Pokémon too? For instance, Kadabra's Pokédex entry in Pokémon Fire Red says it was once a human child who woke up one day, transformed into a Pokémon. This implies that in rare cases, people can become Pokémon while still alive, not just after death. But this contradicts much of what we know about the Pokémon world. If humans and Pokémon are separate species, then why do transformations like this happen? Is it random, or is there an unknown force behind it? An even stranger case is Yveltal, the legendary Pokémon associated with death. Unlike most other legendaries that represent elements or concepts like time or space, Yveltal's existence is centered on absorbing life energy. When it reaches the end of its lifespan, it doesn't just die, it drains the life force from everything around it, turning entire ecosystems into lifeless wastelands before sealing itself away to regenerate. This suggests that in the Pokémon world, life energy can be absorbed, transferred, or even stolen, which could explain why certain Pokémon, like Spiritomb, can contain multiple souls, while others, like Frostlass, seem to retain their human identities even after transformation. It also raises the question of what happens when a Pokémon dies. Does it simply fade away, or does its spirit linger, waiting to return? Could Pokémon be caught in an endless cycle, shifting between forms, their past identities slowly fading as they become something new? The Pokémon world is full of these strange gaps in logic, places where the line between human, Pokémon, and spirit begins to blur. The more you examine these bizarre, unexplained transformations, the more you start to wonder how many Pokémon are really just Pokémon and how many were something else before. Some Pokémon feel as though they've always belonged in nature, evolving alongside the environment like real animals. But then there are Pokémon that feel out-of-place creatures too strange, too unnatural, as if they weren't meant to exist at all. One example of this is Deoxys, a Pokémon that isn't just rare but entirely alien. Unlike any other Pokémon, Deoxys is confirmed to have come from space. Its body formed from a mutated space virus, exposed to a mysterious energy. Deoxys is not a naturally occurring Pokémon. It didn't evolve from any known species, wasn't created by humans, and isn't connected to any ancient myths. Instead, it appeared as an unknown entity from deep space, bringing with it powers no other Pokémon possess. What makes it even more unusual is its ability to constantly change, shifting between various forms at will. These include an attack form, a defense form, a speed form, and a normal form, each altering its entire physiology. No other Pokémon naturally changes its forms in such a manner, leading to the question, is Deoxys a single organism, or something entirely different? Some theories propose that Deoxys is not just one Pokémon, but a regenerating entity that rebuilds itself each time it changes form. This would imply that when Deoxys shifts, it's not just adapting, it's essentially creating a new version of itself and rewriting its own biology like it's made of data. If this is true, does the original Deoxys even exist anymore? Or has it replaced itself so many times that it's now something entirely different? Deoxys isn't the only Pokémon hinting at extraterrestrial life. Another example is Starmie, a Pokémon that seems to defy traditional biology. Unlike most Pokémon, Starmie lacks a face or mouth and doesn't communicate in ways humans understand. Instead, it emits a strange radio signal, which some claim extends far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The Pokédex even mentions that Starmie's core, when it shines at night, has been mistaken for a distant star, possibly trying to send a signal into space. But who or what could it be signaling to? Could there be other Pokémon out there, existing in the farthest reaches of space, unknown to humanity? If so, is Starmie a biological transmitter, sending signals that we can't comprehend? This idea becomes even more bizarre when considering LGM and Beheeyem, two psychic Pokémon that seem based on classic depictions of aliens. Their names LGM for Little Green Men and Beheeyem for Bug-Eyed Monsters are terms often used in sci-fi to describe extraterrestrial life. According to the Pokédex, LGM mysteriously arrived on Earth 50 years ago, with no known origin. Beheeyem, on the other hand, has the ability to erase memories, wiping the minds of those who encounter it. If Beheeyem can erase memories, how many times has it already done so? Could it have been on Earth for far longer than we realize, altering people's memories to ensure we never fully understand its origin. Could there be other alien Pokémon hidden on Earth, their existence repeatedly wiped from history? The idea of extraterrestrial Pokémon suggests something profound about the Pokémon universe, that life exists beyond Earth and that Pokémon aren't limited to just one planet. Some creatures that trainers encounter may not even belong to this world, and if Pokémon can come from space, what else could be out there? Are Deoxys, Starmie, and Bahiam the only ones? Or are they just the first signs of something far bigger, something beyond our understanding? While some Pokémon seem ancient, as though they have always existed, others appear far too advanced, as if they were created long before the world was ready for them. Among the most mysterious are the Ultra Beast Pokémon that don't fit into the natural order of the world. Unlike legendary or mythical Pokémon, which are powerful but still connected to the Pokémon world's history, the Ultra Beasts feel entirely separate, as if they don't belong in this reality at all. Introduced in Pokémon Sunday and Moon, the Ultra Beasts are described as extra-dimensional beings that emerge from ultra wormholes, connecting the Pokémon world to something beyond. What's even more unsettling is that they don't behave like normal Pokémon. Their biology is strange, their designs alien, and their names like Nihilego, Symbiote, Absorption, and Lightning sound more like scientific classifications than actual names. This raises a disturbing question. Are the Ultra Beasts even Pokémon? Every Pokémon, from the smallest Caterpie to the most powerful Arceus, follows certain rules. They can be caught in Pokeballs, trained, and evolve or change forms in some way. But Ultra Beasts seem to defy these norms. They feel like entities from an entirely different ecosystem, creatures from a reality where the laws of nature are different. Take Nihilego, for example. Unlike other rock-type Pokémon, it doesn't appear solid. Its body is translucent, almost gelatinous, as though it's not fully materialized in this world. According to the in-game lore, Nihilego doesn't just exist passively, it attaches to living creatures, controlling their behavior like a parasite. This was most famously shown in Pokémon Sunday and Moon, where a character named Lusamine becomes infected by Nihilego's neurotoxins, warping her mind and driving her to an unstable, obsessive state. This suggests a terrifying possibility. What if the Ultra Beasts aren't just visiting our world? In the Pokémon world, there's a growing idea that certain Ultra Beasts may be subtly influencing reality in ways we don't fully grasp. If one, like Nilo, can take control of a human's mind, could others be affecting the Pokémon world, changing Pokémon evolution, shifting nature's balance, or even altering the very fabric of existence? One such Ultra Beast is Guzzlord, which seems to exist solely for consumption. Unlike typical Pokémon, which serve ecological roles, Guzzlord devours everything in its path mountains, rivers, entire buildings with no limit to its hunger. It has no visible digestive system, no weakness, and doesn't produce waste, suggesting it doesn't just consume but converts matter into something else. It can absorb infinite energy without ever filling up. This raises the question, where does everything it consumes go? Does Guzzlord obey the same physical laws as other Pokémon, or is everything it eats sent back to its home dimension, feeding something much larger waiting on the other side of the ultra wormholes? Then there's Poipole, the only Ultra Beast known to evolve. If Poipole can evolve into Naganadel, it implies that some Ultra Beasts might follow more traditional evolutionary rules, blurring the line between them being true outsiders and something in between. Could it be that Ultra Beasts are the earliest forms of Pokémon evolution, ancient creatures that existed before Pokémon as we know them, slipping into our world from a forgotten past? The arrival of Ultra Beasts has shattered the notion that the Pokémon world is a closed system, revealing that this universe might be just one part of something much larger. If ultra wormholes can open at any time, allowing creatures from another dimension to enter, what else is out there, waiting for the right moment to emerge? The deeper you explore the Pokémon world, the more it seems certain Pokémon were never meant to be understood. While some creatures have clear origins and fit into the natural world, Others defy every rule, not belonging to any ecosystem, evolutionary pattern, or logic. One of the most unsettling examples of this is Eternatus, a Pokémon so enormous that it stretches across the land like the skeleton of a forgotten god. Eternatus isn't just another legendary Pokémon, it is an energy source itself, radiating power in a way that should not exist in the Pokémon world. This energy, called Dynamax energy, is the same force that allows Pokémon to grow to enormous sizes in the Galar region. But here's the disturbing part. Eternatus doesn't just produce Dynamax energy, it is Dynamax energy. The entire phenomenon of Pokémon growing to massive sizes and altering battlefields is not a natural occurrence but a direct result of an ancient being buried deep beneath the earth for thousands of years. This raises a chilling thought. If Dynamax energy is unnatural, and Pokémon were never meant to grow into giant versions of themselves, what happens when a Pokémon Dynamaxes? Is it merely drawing on stored energy? Or is it temporarily becoming something it was never meant to be? And if that's the case, what happens to Pokémon exposed to Dynamax energy for too long? The Pokédex hints that Eternatus once attempted to consume the world in an event known as the Darkest Day, unleashing such power that it nearly wiped out life in the Galar region. Only the intervention of two other legendary Pokémon, Zacian and Zamacenta, stopped it, forcing Eternatus into a dormant state deep underground. Yet, even while dormant, its power seeped into the land, spreading Dynamax energy and subtly influencing Pokémon. This means that Dynamax battles, with trainers using this energy for sport, are tapping into the power of a creature that once tried to destroy the world. Every time a Pokémon grows to a massive size, trainers unknowingly awaken the same energy that nearly ended everything. Then there's Eternamax, a form of Eternatus that is almost never seen. It's the largest Pokémon to exist, breaking all the rules of what Pokémon should be capable of. It's so massive that it can't even fit on the screen during battle. The most disturbing part is that no trainer has ever caught an Eternamax Eternatusit exists solely as a force of destruction, beyond human control, something that cannot be contained. This raises a terrifying question. Is Eternatus still dormant, or is it simply waiting? If it once influenced the world while buried beneath the earth, spreading its energy across Galar without ever waking up, what would happen if it fully awakened? The power involved is enough to make Pokémon grow to unimaginable sizes. If Eternatus were to regain its full strength, could it reshape the entire Pokémon world? Would all Pokémon be permanently transformed by a force that was never meant to exist? And there's an even more troubling idea. What if Eternatus isn't alone? The Pokémon world has encountered alien life before creatures from space that defy the laws of nature. If Eternatus landed in Galar and spread its influence, then where did it originate? Could there be more creatures like it drifting through space, waiting to descend upon another world and repeat the cycle? This would suggest that the Pokémon world isn't just shaped by natural evolution, divine legends, or artificial experiments, but also by ancient, unknowable entities being so massive and powerful that they defy the standard understanding of what a Pokémon is. These aren't creatures meant for traditional battles. They are forces of nature, relics of a time before trainers, Pokeballs, or the concept of catching Pokémon existed. If Eternatus is just one of these, then the world of Pokémon might still be under threat from even greater forces yet to appear. The Pokémon world is rich with myths and legends passed down through generations, explaining the origins of the world and its creatures. But beneath these familiar stories lie darker mysteries clues that hint at powers far beyond what most trainers know. One of the most unusual legends is that of the original dragon, a being that no longer exists but whose presence still influences the Unova region. In Pokémon Black and White, players meet Reshiram and Zekrom, two legendary Pokémon representing truth and ideals. Later, in Black 2 and White 2, Kyurem is revealed, but it stands apart. Kyurem is incomplete, a hollow shell of something greater, seemingly waiting to be restored. This raises a troubling question. What happened to the rest of it? According to Unova's lore, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem were once one being, a vast dragon that embodied balance, not yet divided between truth and ideals. At some point, it was split into three. Reshiram and Zekrom retained power and purpose, but Kyurem was left as the empty remandera being that lost its identity and essence. This changes how we view legendary Pokémon. They're usually seen as complete, powerful beings with specific roles, but Kyurem is different. It feels unfinished, a remnant of something greater that has been lost to time. This explains why its abilities involve forcibly merging with either Reshiram or Zekrom temporary attempts to reclaim fragments of what it once was. Even then, it remains incomplete, missing something forever gone. A larger question emerges: who or what broke the original dragon apart? Was it a natural event or the result of an outside force? Some believe it was due to a conflict between ancient heroes that divided Unova, but what if something more powerful caused the split on purpose? This idea adds depth to Unova's mysterious history. Unlike other regions with clear creation stories involving deities, Unova's past is marked by gaps and hints at deeper events. The legend of the original dragon suggests that the world's balance is fragile, that even legendaries can be shattered, and that there might be other forgotten beings who face similar fates. If it happened once, could it happen again? Could there be other Pokémon that were once whole, only to be divided or reduced to hollow fragments like Kyurem? If the original dragon was destroyed, it means there are forces capable of breaking even the most powerful beings. The tale of the original dragon isn't just mythology, it's a warning. Even the mightiest are vulnerable, balance is not guaranteed, and hidden forces may still threaten the Pokémon world. Darkrai is a Pokémon with a disturbing and eerie design. Resembling a ghost or dark-type creature, it is known for invading the minds of living beings, trapping them in endless, inescapable nightmares. Unlike most Pokémon, which engage in physical battles, Darkrai uses its ability to target the subconscious of its victims, causing them to experience terrifying visions that never cease until they wake. However, what's more unsettling is that there is no known defense against Darkrai's power. While many Pokémon abilities can be countered, such as water types resisting fire moves, dark types blocking psychic attacks, or curing status conditions like paralysis, or poison Darkrai's bad dreams ability cannot be fought against. If it targets you, you will fall asleep and be trapped in a nightmare. Unlike normal sleep, which is temporary and restful, Darkrai's dreams are described as endless, looping nightmares so realistic that the victim cannot tell if they are awake or still dreaming. This raises an alarming possibility. Could someone be trapped in a dream so deep that they never wake up? The Pokédex describes people waking in terror, screaming from the horrifying visions Darkrai has shown them. But for every person who wakes up, could there be others who never escape, still trapped in their dream, unaware that their real bodies have long since decayed? This idea becomes even more disturbing when considering Cresselia, the Pokémon said to counter Darkrai. While Darkrai is associated with nightmares, Cresselia is linked to good dreams and peaceful sleep. A single feather from Cresselia is enough to ward off nightmares, but this raises an unsettling question. If Cresselia is meant to counteract Darkrai's power, why does Darkrai's nightmares still persist? The fact that Darkrai's nightmares are still a known problem suggests that Cresselia isn't a perfect counter. For every person saved by Cresselia's influence, there may be many others left trapped in Darkrai's dream world with no escape. What's even stranger is that Darkrai itself does not seem to act out of malice. Unlike other Pokémon associated with destruction or chaos, Darkrai is described as a being whose existence unintentionally harms everything around it. This makes Darkrai different from Pokémon like Giratina or Yveltal, who are actively linked to death or destruction. Darkrai does not kill or destroy the physical world, but it erases reality in a different way by replacing waking life with an eternal dream, trapping people in a state where time no longer progresses. If that's the case, what happens to those who are trapped? If someone spends years in Darkrai's nightmare and eventually wakes up, would they still be the same person? Or would they be forever changed by a dream that felt more real than reality itself? And the most unsettling thought, what if you never wake up? What if Darkrai has already placed you in a nightmare, and the world you perceive as real is simply part of the dream? How would you even know the difference? Not all Pokémon are naturally born. Some are created by humans, some are formed through ancient forces, and others seem to exist outside the flow of time. However, there are Pokémon that seem as if they were never meant to exist at all, creatures that defy biology, logic, and even reality. One such example is Giratina, a Pokémon so dangerous and uncontrollable that it was banished from the Pokémon world entirely. Unlike other legendary Pokémon, which are often revered or worshipped, Giratina's entire existence is defined by exile. It was cast into the Distortion world, a parallel dimension where the usual rules of time and space don't apply. According to Pokémon Lore, Giratina was too violent to remain in the world, with its destructive nature rendering it unfit to exist alongside other beings. But this explanation raises a troubling question. What exactly did Giratina do to deserve such a fate? Most legendary Pokémon, even those associated with destruction, such as Yveltal or Kyogre, are allowed to exist within the Pokémon world. But Giratina wasn't just sealed away, it was removed from reality altogether, imprisoned in a realm that defies normal physics. This suggests that Giratina's power was not merely dangerous, it was something beyond what the Pokémon world could contain. The Distortion world itself is evidence of this, as it is a place with no stable ground, no clear direction, and no natural life. Gravity shifts unpredictably, objects float without explanation, and reflections appear where they shouldn't. It's as if the Distortion world was not just another dimension, but a realm that was never fully finished, a place that doesn't function like a real world should. This raises a haunting question. Was the Distortion world created solely to imprison Giratina, or did Giratina? Darkrai is a ghostly or dark-type Pokémon with a sinister design, known for invading the minds of living beings and trapping them in unending nightmares. Unlike other Pokémon that engage in physical battles, Darkrai attacks the subconscious, causing terrifying visions that persist until the victim wakes. However, the most disturbing part is that there's no known defense against Darkrai's ability. While most Pokémon abilities can be countered, Fire-type moves by Water types, Psychic attacks by Dark types, and status conditions like paralysis or poison can be cured, Darkrai's Bad Dreams ability has no such counter. If Darkrai targets someone, they will fall asleep and experience an endless loop of nightmares. These dreams feel so real that the victim can't tell whether they are awake or still dreaming. This raises a chilling question. Could Darkrai's nightmares be strong enough to trap someone in a dream state forever, preventing them from ever waking up? The Pokédex describes victims waking up in terror from these visions, but if some manage to wake up, could there be others who never escape, still trapped in their dreams while their real bodies have withered away? This becomes even more unsettling when considering Cresselia, a Pokémon said to counter Darkrai. While Darkrai causes nightmares, Cresselia is linked to good dreams and peaceful sleep. A single feather from Cresselia can dispel nightmares, but if it truly counteracts Darkrai, why does Darkrai remain a fearsome presence? This suggests that Cresselia's power isn't perfect, and for every person it saves, many others might still be left entrapped in Darkrai's dreamscape. Strangely, Darkrai doesn't seem to act out of malice. Unlike other Pokémon known for destruction, Darkrai is described as a being whose harmful effects are unintentional, simply part of its nature. It doesn't kill or destroy the physical world like other legendary Pokémon such as Giratina or Yveltal, but it erases reality in a different way by replacing it with an endless dream. If someone spends years in this nightmare and wakes up, would they even be the same person? Or would they return as a hollow version of themselves, shaped by a dream that felt more real than life itself? The most unsettling thought, however, is whether they would ever wake up at all. Could it be that Darkrai has already trapped you in a nightmare, and the world you perceive as real is just another part of the dream? How would you know the difference? Some Pokémon are born naturally, while others are created by humans or ancient forces, and some seem to exist outside the fabric of time. Then there are Pokémon that feel unnatural creatures that defy logic and reality. One such Pokémon is Giratina, so dangerous and uncontrollable that it was banished from the Pokémon world. Unlike other legendary Pokémon that are worshipped or revered, Giratina's entire existence is defined by exile. It was cast into the Distortion World, a parallel dimension where time and space don't function normally. Giratina was too violent to remain in the regular world, but this raises a disturbing question. What did Giratina do to deserve such a fate? Even Pokémon linked to destruction, like Yveltal or Kyogre, were allowed to exist within the Pokémon world. But Giratina wasn't just sealed away, it was removed entirely from reality, trapped in a realm that doesn't obey the laws of physics. The Distortion World itself is proof of this anomaly. It's a place where gravity is unpredictable, objects float aimlessly, and reflections appear in odd places. It's as if the Distortion World is not just another dimension, but an incomplete realm, a place that was never fully finished. This raises the question, was the Distortion World created solely to imprison Giratina, or did Giratina's existence break the very fabric of reality itself? Before the world as we know it began, one of the most unsettling aspects of Giratina is its connection to time and space. According to Pokémon Lore, Dialga controls time, and Palkia controls space, two fundamental forces that shape the Pokémon universe. However, Giratina wasn't placed alongside them, but was instead cast into a completely separate realm. Some theories propose that Giratina wasn't just equal to Dialga and Palkia, but something greater, a force that existed before them, only to be erased from history. This is supported by Giratina's two distinct forms in the Pokémon world, its altered form, which appears as a grounded, dragon-like shape that seems constrained, and its origin form, which emerges in the Distortion World as a far more fluid, unstable form, almost as if this is its true state before it was cast away. This suggests that the Pokémon world itself may be limiting Giratina's real nature, forcing it into a weaker, less chaotic form, easier to contain. But if this is true, what would happen if Giratina ever fully returned? Would it remain in this controlled form, or would the world itself start to bend around it, reshaping to accommodate something that should never have been sealed away? Even more troubling is Giratina's role in Pokémon Platinum. Unlike most legendary Pokémon, which merely exist as powerful beings, Giratina actively watches throughout the events of the game, appearing as a shadowy presence, observing the player and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. No other legendary Pokémon behaves this way. Most are either dormant, sealed away, or unaware of the player's actions. But Giratina is different, aware of the world it was cast out from, still interacting with it, as if it hasn't fully accepted its exile. This raises a darker thought. If Giratina was once banished from the Pokémon world, could it ever return permanently? Could the Pokémon universe handle its presence, or would reality itself start to unravel under the weight of something that should have remained forgotten? And what if the world we know now isn't the original version? What if Giratina wasn't only banished for its violence, but because it once existed in a previous version of reality, a world that was eventually erased and replaced by the one we see today? If that's the case, then Giratina is not just a legendary Pokémon, it's the last remaining remnant of a universe that no longer exists. The Pokémon world is full of creation myths that explain how the universe came to be. According to legend, Arceus was the first Pokémon, the one who shaped reality itself, creating time, space, and all the forces that govern existence. But there's something strange about this story. It only tells part of the truth. It explains how the world was formed, but doesn't explain what existed before. And if Arceus truly created the universe, then why does Pokémon history seem filled with traces of things that existed long before it? One of the most unsettling parts of Arceus' lore is the presence of Pokémon that seem to belong outside the world it supposedly created, like Necrozma, described as a being from a world with no light. Necrozma is feared, not revered, as a deity like many other legendary Pokémon. It appears to come from somewhere else entirely, raising the question, if Arceus created the Pokémon world, where did Necrozma come from? Necrozma's entire existence revolves around absorbing light, as though it once belonged to a world devoid of it. It's described as Brocana shattered version of what it once was, constantly seeking energy to restore itself. Moreover, it's one of the few Pokémon capable of fusing with other legendary Pokémon, such as Solgaleo and Lunala, to become even more powerful. This suggests something terrifying. Necrozma was once whole, and something shattered it. This isn't the first time Pokémon lore hints at a hidden, erased past. The Regis Regirock, Registeel, and Regiseer Pokémon that appear artificial, created rather than born. The Pokédex describes them as ancient beings, constructed from different materials, almost as if they were designed for a specific purpose. But here's where things get unsettling. They were sealed away in ruins, hidden behind puzzles and barriers meant to keep them locked away forever. If the Regis were just ancient Pokémon, why would they need to be sealed away? Why would ancient humans, or something else, go to such lengths to trap them? And what were they protecting the world from? The answer might lie in Regigigas, the supposed king of the Regiza Pokémon, said to have been powerful enough to move entire continents. This suggests the Regis weren't random creations. They may have once been weapons, designed specifically to control the land, ice and metal that make up the world. If that's the case, who or what built them? This idea becomes even stranger when considering the newer Regis, Regidrago and Regieleki, which were only recently discovered. Recently, it was discovered that unlike their predecessors, these Pokémon don't manipulate natural materials. Instead, Ryle is composed entirely of electricity, while Rhydo is believed to be made from the remnants of a dragon Pokémon that no longer exists. If the Regis were artificial, could this mean dragons once roamed the world, possibly even stronger than the ones we know today? And if Regidrago is built from their remains, does this suggest that an ancient civilization created the Regis by hunting dragons for power? The fact that so many of these Pokémon have been sealed away points to a pattern. Something occurred in the distant past of the Pokémon world that no one remembers, something that led to the extinction of entire species, the trapping of legendary Pokémon, and the appearance of unnatural beings like Necrozma from beyond the known universe. What if the Pokémon world as we know it isn't the original version? What if Arceus didn't create reality from scratch, but rebuilt it after something else was destroyed? If that's the case, Arceus might not be the first Pokémon, but the last survivor of whatever existed before, trying to rebuild the remnants of a lost world. But if Pokémon like Necrozma, the Regis, and the strange sealed creatures from the past still exist, then perhaps the old world isn't entirely gone. Maybe it's waiting for the moment when history repeats itself. There are Pokémon that dwell in the sky, deep in the ocean, or even travel through time. Yet, there are also Pokémon that seem entirely detached from the world itself, not just existing in different places, but across entirely different planes of reality. Among them, few are more mysterious than Hooper, a Pokémon capable of bending reality itself. Hooper can create wormhole portals that allow instant travel across vast distances. In its confined form, Hooper is small, mischievous, and almost playful. But in its true form, Hooper Unbound, it becomes a much more frightening entity. The Pokédex describes Hooper Unbound as a Pokémon so powerful that it can summon entire legendary Pokémon at will, as if distance means nothing. It's said to warp time and space, moving objects like mountains and entire castles across regions with ease. This raises a troubling question. Where is Hooper pulling these objects from? Most Pokémon travel through physical space, following the world's natural rules, but Hooper doesn't need to walk, fly, or swim. It simply moves things through its rings, as if reality itself is a series of connected points it can manipulate at will. If Hooper can summon things from anywhere, could it also pull objects or beings from places that shouldn't exist at all? This theory becomes even more unsettling when considering how Hooper is depicted in Pokémon lore. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it is said that Hooper once stole treasure from humans, warping objects into its own dimension and hiding them away. But what if Hooper didn't just steal objects? What if it also stole people? If Hooper can travel across time and space, how many people or Pokémon have been erased from history, pulled into one of its portals, never to return? This could explain the strange energy around Hooper's rings. Unlike other portals in the Pokémon world, such as Ultra Wormholes or the Distortion World, Hooper's rings don't lead to any known location. They're not bound to space or time in any traditional sense. Instead, they appear to be gateways to nowhere portals that simply take things away without any clear destination. If Hooper possesses such an ability, what does this mean for the Pokémon world? Could Hooper be responsible for the disappearance of civilizations, lost artifacts, and even entire species? This theory becomes even more concerning when considering the ancient, unconnected ruins scattered throughout the world. Places like the Abyssal Ruins, the Singo Ruins, and the old chateau seem to have once had a purpose, but that purpose is now forgotten. These abandoned structures serve no modern function. Could it be that Hooper, or something similar, was responsible for removing the people who once lived in these places, erasing entire histories by simply pulling them into a void beyond our understanding? If Hooper's rings do lead somewhere, where exactly do they go? The Pokémon world has explored alternate dimensions before, like Ultra Space and the Distortion world, but Hooper's rings are different. They don't seem to lead to a defined space. They could connect to anywhere, possibly nowhere at all. And here's the most unsettling thought. What if something is watching from the other side of those rings? If Hooper can reach across space and time, could something else be looking back through its portals? These cells are not independent Pokémon. They lack their own will, abilities, or identity. They are simply parts of a greater whole, waiting to be assembled. But what exactly are they waiting for? According to Pokémon Lore, Zygarde exists to maintain balance in the ecosystem, and only acts when it senses the world is in danger. However, this raises unsettling questions. Who or what decides when Zygarde should awaken, and why does it remain dormant despite numerous disasters? The Pokémon world has experienced wars, natural calamities, and legendary Pokémon battling for control over reality, yet Zygarde has stayed mostly inactive. If its purpose is to prevent destruction, why didn't it intervene during Groudon and Kyogre's battle, which nearly submerged and scorched the world? Why did it do nothing when Dialga and Palkia fought, distorting time and space? Why didn't it act when Anatas threatened the entire Galar region? This suggests something more terrifying. Zygarde isn't protecting the world, it is waiting for something worse. The fact that Zygarde is not a single being but a collection of parts raises another disturbing possibility. What if Zygarde was never meant to be one Pokémon? What if it is part of something much larger? A network of consciousness that spans the entire Pokémon world, quietly observing events from the shadows. If that's true, then who created it? Most legendary Pokémon are tied to myths, natural forces, or creation itself, but Zygarde has no known creator, no direct connection to Arceus, and no link to the gods of time and space. Instead, it exists as something separate, something that seems to have always been waiting beneath the surface. This raises an even darker question. What if Zygarde was never a Pokémon in the first place? The way it assembles itself is not typical. It doesn't evolve or grow. It constructs itself from pieces, building up to higher and higher levels of power, until it reaches its ultimate form. This is not how Pokémon evolve. Pokémon grow stronger over time through natural processes, but Zygarde is constructed. If it is built, then who or what built it? The only Pokémon with a similar function is type Null, an artificial Pokémon created by humans to control powerful forces. But type Null was a failed experiment, a botched attempt to recreate Arceus. Zygarde, on the other hand, appears fully formed, as though it was always meant to exist this way. Could it be that Zygarde was engineered by something older than humans, something that existed before Pokémon history was even recorded? This would explain why Zygarde only awakens in times of great crisis. It was designed as a failsafe, a last resort, meant to act only when absolutely necessary. But this raises a terrifying thought. If Zygarde ever fully awakens, what kind of event could trigger it? If legendary battles and world-ending disasters haven't been enough, then something far worse must be coming. And when Zygarde does awaken, does it simply restore balance, or does it reshape the world entirely? If its purpose is to prevent destruction, does that mean it would erase anything threatening balance, even entire civilizations, species, or humanity itself? Zygarde's presence suggests that we have only seen part of the story, that the balance of the world is more fragile than we realize, and that something unseen is watching, waiting for the right moment to intervene. If Zygarde is truly a guardian of balance, what exactly is it guarding against? The Pokemon world is full of creatures with strange abilities, Pokemon that control fire, summon storms, or manipulate space and time. But occasionally, there are Pokemon that seem to break the rules completely, possessing abilities that defy logic, challenge the boundaries of life and death, or hint at powers no being should have. One of the most disturbing examples of this is Frostlass, a Pokemon far more terrifying than it first appears. Frostlass is based on the Yuki Onna, a mythical snow woman from Japanese folklore who lures people into the mountains and freezes them alive. The Pokédex confirms that this inspiration goes beyond aesthetics. Frostlass doesn't just live in the cold, it actively seeks out humans. It's said to freeze people and display their bodies as decorations, turning them into lifeless statues of ice. But here's where it gets stranger. Frostlass is one of the few Pokemon in the series implied to have once been human. According to its Pokédex entries, Frostlass is formed when a woman lost in the mountains perishes in the snow, her spirit merging with an icy body to become something new. Unlike ghost-type Pokemon that haunt objects or places, Frostlass is something entirely different. It's not just a spirit, it's an entirely new existence, blending human and Pokemon into one being. This raises a terrifying possibility. How many ghost Pokemon were once human? If Frostlass can form from the soul of a dead woman, what does that mean for the other ghost Pokemon? These cells are not independent entities. They lack their own will, abilities, and identity. They are simply parts of something larger, a waiting assembly. But what exactly are they waiting for? According to Pokémon Lore, Zygarde exists to maintain balance in the ecosystem. It does not act unless it detects that the world is in danger. However, this explanation brings up unsettling questions. Who or what determines when Zygarde should awaken, and why does it remain dormant when so many other disasters have occurred? The Pokemon world has witnessed wars, natural disasters, and legendary Pokemon fighting for control over reality itself. Yet Zygarde has remained largely inactive. If its purpose is to prevent destruction, why didn't it intervene during Groudon and Kyogre's battle, which nearly submerged and scorched the world? Why did it stay silent when Dialga and Palkia fought, distorting time and space? Why did it not act when Anatole threatened the entire Galar region? This implies something disturbing. Zygarde is not protecting the world, it is waiting for something worse. The fact that Zygarde is not one being, but many, raises another chilling possibility. What if Zygarde was never meant to be a single Pokemon? What if it is part of something much larger, a network of consciousness spread across the Pokemon world, silently observing from the shadows? If that is the case, who created it? Most legendary Pokemon are linked to myths, natural forces, or creation itself, but Zygarde has no known creator, no clear connection to Arceus, nor any direct link to the gods of time and space. It exists as something separate, something that seems to have always been there, waiting beneath the surface. This raises an even darker question. What if Zygarde was never a Pokemon in the first place? The way Zygarde assembles itself is unnatural. It doesn't evolve or grow. It forms itself from pieces, gaining more power until it reaches its ultimate form. This is not how Pokemon function. They evolve through natural processes, becoming stronger over time, but Zygarde is constructed, and if it is built, then who or what built it? The only Pokemon with a similar function is Type Null, an artificial Pokemon created by humans in an attempt to control powerful forces. However, Type Null was a failed experiment, an attempt to recreate Arceus that resulted in something incomplete. Zygarde, on the other hand, seems to be fully formed, as if it was always meant to exist this way. Could it be that Zygarde was engineered by something even older than humans, something that existed before Pokemon history was recorded? This could explain why Zygarde only awakens in times of extreme crisis. It was designed as a failsafe, a last resort that only activates when absolutely necessary. But this leads to a terrifying thought. If Zygarde ever fully awakens, what kind of event would trigger it? If legendary Pokémon battles and world-ending disasters haven't been enough, then something far worse must be coming. And when Zygarde does awaken, what happens? Does it simply restore balance? Or does it completely reshape the world? If its purpose is to prevent destruction, does that mean it would erase whatever threatens balance, even entire civilizations, species, or even humanity itself? Zygarde's presence in the Pokémon world suggests we have only seen part of the story. The balance of the world is more fragile than we realize, and something unseen is waiting, ready to intervene when needed. If Zygarde is truly a guardian of balance, what exactly is it guarding against? The Pokémon world is full of creatures with strange powers, Pokémon that control fire, summon storms, or manipulate time and space. But occasionally, there are Pokémon that seem to break all the rules, possessing abilities that defy logic, challenge the boundaries of life and death, or suggest powers no being should possess. One of the most disturbing examples is Frostlass, a Pokémon far more terrifying than it appears at first. Frostlass is based on the Yurei, a mythical snow woman from Japanese folklore who lures people into the mountains and freezes them alive. The Pokédex confirms that this inspiration goes beyond aesthetics. Frostlass doesn't just live in the cold, it actively seeks out humans. It is said to freeze people and display their frozen bodies as decorations, turning them into lifeless statues of ice. But here's where it gets even stranger. Frostlass is one of the few Pokémon implied to have once been human. According to its Pokédex entries, Frostlass forms when a woman lost in the mountains perishes in the snow, her spirit merging with an icy body to take on a new form. Unlike ghost Pokémon, which simply haunt locations or objects, Frostlass is something else entirely. It is not just a spirit, it is a new existence, blending both human and Pokémon into one entity. This raises a horrifying question. How many ghost Pokémon were once human? If Frostlass can form from the soul of a deceased woman, then does it suggest? This suggests that other ghost Pokémon like Banette, Dusknoir, and Chandelier may also have origins linked to lost human souls. If this is true, then when a Pokémon dies, do they become spirits as well, or is this fate only for humans? The idea that humans might become Pokémon after death challenges everything we know about the Pokémon world, indicating that the boundary between species might not be as firm as it seems. The transformation from human to Pokémon might not only be possible, but could have occurred many times before. This makes the case of Yamask even more unsettling. Unlike Frostlass, which appears fully formed as a Pokémon, Yamask still carries the face it once had as a human, a mask it holds onto, staring at it as if trying to recall its past life. Some Pokédex entries even mention that Yamask retains its human memories, making it one of the few Pokémon confirmed to have once been something else. If Yamask remembers its past life, then does Frostlass remember hers too? Does she still recall the cold, the fear, the final moments before she became something else? And when Frostlass looks at a human, does she see another person or a potential decoration for her frozen domain? This concept grows darker when considering evolution. Pokémon are known to evolve into stronger forms, but if some were once human, does that mean evolution reshapes their very identities? When a Snorunt evolves into Frostlass, is it simply getting stronger, or is it undergoing a deeper transformation, one that erases whatever memories of its past self still remain? The most terrifying thought is this. What if Frostlass isn't the only Pokémon that was once human? Could other ghost Pokémon share this fate, their true origins hidden by time, myths, and legends? The Pokémon world may be full of creatures that are not just spirits, but trapped souls, forever wandering in new forms they never chose. If that's the case, how many Pokémon trainers have unknowingly caught and battled creatures that were once like them? And if a Pokémon could remember its past life, what would it say? Would it reveal the truth to its trainer? Or would it simply wait for the day when history repeats itself and another lost soul is reborn as something new? The Pokémon world is a place of balance between nature and technology. The the past and future, life and death. But there are Pokémon that seem to exist outside of this balanced creatures, that don't just live alongside the world, but distort or erase reality itself. Among them, few are more disturbing than Chandelure, a Pokémon that doesn't merely haunt places but actively steals souls. While many ghost Pokémon seem to have once been alive, whether as humans, objects, or lost spirits, Chandelure is different. According to its Pokédex entries, Chandelure doesn't just haunt the living, it drains their life force, burning away their souls while leaving their bodies behind. The most chilling part is that once the soul is consumed, it is lost forever, unable to move on to any afterlife. This is unlike Yamask, which carries a mask of its former self, or Froslas, which may still retain some connection to its past life. Chandelure's victims don't become spirits, they cease to exist. This raises a terrifying question. What exactly does Chandelure burn? In the real world, fire consumes physical objects, turning them into ash. But Chandelure doesn't burn bodies, it burns something deeper. The Pokédex clearly states that Chandelure's flames don't produce heat, meaning they aren't physical fire at all. Instead, they seem to target the very essence of life, consuming something that can never be restored. What makes things even worse is that Chandelure doesn't need to attack to claim a victim. Many Pokémon hunt for food, chasing their prey and fighting for survival, but Chandelure simply floats silently in place, its flames hypnotizing those who gaze at them. The moment someone looks into its ghostly fire, they become entranced and helpless as their soul is drained away. They don't even resist. This makes Chandelure one of the most terrifying Pokémon because, unlike predators that rely on strength or strategy, Chandelure's victims come to it willingly. There is no battle, no warning, and no way to realize what is happening until it's too late. If Chandelure's fire doesn't burn physical matter, where do the souls it consumes go? Are they destroyed completely, or are they trapped somewhere, lingering in the flames? Could Chandelure's light actually be made from the souls it has taken, flickering eternally as remnants of those it has erased? This idea becomes even more disturbing when considering that Chandelure isn't a unique Pokémon, it's a species. This means there could be hundreds or even thousands of Chandelure roaming different parts of the Pokémon world, draining souls that will never be recovered. If this has been happening for centuries, how many people and Pokémon have already been lost to its flames? And if Chandelure exists, then what other dangers might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for their victims to lower their guard? In the Pokémon world, death isn't always the final end. For those who encounter Chandelure, there may not even be an afterlife. Not all Pokémon live in forests, oceans, or caves. Some seem to exist in spaces that shouldn't be, lingering on the edge of life and death, observing the world from places beyond human comprehension. Among these is one of the most unsettling, Dusknoir, a Pokémon that doesn't just haunt the living, it takes them away. Dusknoir is different from most ghost-type Pokémon. It doesn't just live in abandoned places or frighten people for mischief. It has a purpose. According to its Pokédex entries, Dusknoir is tasked with guiding souls to the afterlife. This is disturbing because it implies that the Pokémon world has a defined afterlife, a place where souls are meant to go. But the twist is that Dusknoir doesn't just guide souls, it decides which ones to take. The Pokédex suggests that Dusknoir receives instructions from another world, one beyond human and Pokémon perception. It's unclear who or what is giving these orders. Some believe it's part of nature's cycle, but others fear that Dusknoir is a servant working for an unknown entity, following commands rather than choosing whom to take. What if those commands are unjust? What if Dusknoir takes souls that aren't ready to depart, pulling them into the void and leaving them trapped there forever? The existence of its enormous mouth, unseen in most situations, may be used to consume souls, transporting them to the unknown. But what happens to those souls? Are they peacefully guided to the afterlife, or are they simply erased by the very being meant to escort them? Dusknoir doesn't just interact with the dead, it can also communicate with the living. In Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, it speaks to both humans and Pokémon, fully aware of its actions, yet it never questions its duty. It continues its task without hesitation, following orders from whatever force lies beyond human understanding. If Dusnoy is indeed a servant, it suggests that the Pokemon world might not be as peaceful as it seems. There could be an unseen power overseeing the fate of every living being, deciding who remains and who vanishes. And if this force controls who moves on, what happens when it decides that a soul should not pass on but instead become lost, caught between life and death? This could explain the existence of spirits like Phantump and Yamask, Pokemon that still remember their past lives yet were never taken by Dusnoy. Were they forgotten? Or did they escape from whatever world Dusnoy serves? And if a soul resists, refusing to move on, would Dusnoy allow them to stay? Or would it drag them away, regardless of their will? If Dusnoy is truly following orders, we may never know the full truth. But one thing is certain. In the Pokemon world, death is not simple. And for those who encounter Dusnoy, there is no escape. There are Pokemon that live in the world of the living and those in the world of the dead, but then there are those caught between, forever wandering in a state of unrest. Few are as tragic or unsettling as Galarian Corsola's evolved form, Cursola. Cursola is unique because it is one of the few Pokemon whose existence is tied directly to extinction. Unlike most ghost types that arise from lost souls or cursed objects, Cursola was once a living species. It was wiped out by environmental collapse, and now it exists as a ghosted creature that shouldn't be, yet still persists. The project initially focused on genetic modification, artificial evolution, and Pokemon created through engineering rather than being caught in the wild. Though the project was eventually cancelled, some of its design ideas lived on. One such idea was a creature resembling Tyranitar, a massive, armored Pokemon intended to result from forced evolution rather than natural growth. After the project ended, most of its designs were lost, but Tyranitar survived, with its backstory altered for gold and silver to show it evolved from Pupitar naturally instead of being artificially created. This change helps explain Tyranitar's unusual lore, though as described as a destructive force. Little is known about its interactions with other Pokemon or the natural world. Because it was originally intended to be unnatural, the recycling of unused designs is common in Pokemon development. Many Pokemon that seem like they were created specifically for a generation were actually conceptualized years earlier and then repurposed. For example, Shellos and Gastrodon were originally designed for Ruby and Sapphire, but were held back due to hardware limitations. The idea of Pokemon with regional variations was eventually implemented in Diamond and Pearl. Likewise, Leafeon was planned for Gold and Silver, but due to balance concerns, the idea was abandoned until it resurfaced in Diamond and Pearl almost a decade later. The same thing happened with Rhyperior, which was originally intended for Generation 2 but debuted in Generation 4. These hidden histories show how long it can take for a concept to come to fruition. Every Pokemon in a game is the result of years of development, with some designs immediately used and others waiting for the right time. Sometimes, a Pokemon may evolve from an entirely different idea, with its final version having a backstory that was never used. Some Pokemon are so iconic that they seem to have always existed, but their designs often undergo drastic changes during development. Take Blaziken as an example. Initially, it wasn't a bird at all, but a feline, resembling a big cat, fitting into an early concept for more feral starter Pokemon. As development continued, the team decided a bird would create a better contrast with the other starter Pokemon, so the feline design was scrapped, and Blaziken became the firefighting warrior we know today. Not all unused designs are discarded though. Many are repurposed for later generations. Garchomp is a clear example. Its original design was snake-like, more akin to a land serpent than the dragon-like form it took. Some elements from this early design were incorporated into Mega Garchomp. Another famous case of a Pokemon almost looking entirely different is Venusaur. Initially, it was designed with a more reptilian, lizard-like appearance, rather than the amphibian-like look it adopted. The design was later adjusted to emphasize the balance between plant and animal traits. Even today, hints of its original form can still be seen in its sprite from the first games. Even Pikachu, the franchise's mascot, almost had a different design. In its early stages, Pikachu was a small, chubby rodent with a different tail and a more neutral expression. It wasn't until the development team noticed the popularity of cute, round characters that Pikachu was reimagined as the beloved character we know today. There are humans and Pokémon unknowingly controlled by Malamar, carrying out its commands without realizing it. Could trainers, researchers, or even entire organizations be under its influence, acting as mere puppets for a force beyond their understanding? This raises an even darker question: what if Malamar isn't working alone? If multiple Malamar can collaborate, it suggests their mind control may extend beyond individuals, potentially affecting entire populations. Could entire cities, towns, or regions have already fallen under their influence, with people unaware that they no longer control their own actions? The most frightening possibility is this: if Malamar has the power to erase memories and manipulate thoughts to serve its desires, resistance may be impossible. If it has infiltrated those in power, any attempts to stop it could be wiped away before they even start. If Malamar can truly control entire populations, the world as we know it may be an illusion. The decisions people make, the battles they fight, and the history they believe might all be influenced by something hidden beneath the surface, steering the world in a direction no one ever expected. If that's the case, the real question becomes, how can you fight against something when you don't even know you've already lost? The Pokémon world is home to creatures that push nature's boundaries, Pokémon that can breathe fire, summon storms, or even control time. However, there are also Pokémon that represent a different kind of horror. These are creatures that don't just exist in the world, they feed off the life force of others, surviving through parasitism. One of the most disturbing examples is Parasect. At first glance, Parasect appears to be a simple bug-type Pokémon, a large insect with a mushroom on its back. However, the reality is far darker. The mushroom is not just part of Parasect, it is the master. The Pokédex reveals that Parasect is entirely controlled by a parasitic fungusa spore that takes over the Pokémon's mind and body, leaving no trace of its original self. Unlike most Pokémon, which retain some level of willpower or instinct, Parasect has no control over its actions. It moves, battles, and behaves entirely at the command of the fungus on its back. This is not a case of symbiosis, but of total domination. The original Paras, the Pokémon that once was, is no longer there, its mind and body hijacked for the fungus's survival. The blank, lifeless eyes of Parasect are a haunting indication that nothing remains of the creature that once inhabited that body. It doesn't stop there. The fungus's goal isn't just to control Parasect it seeks to spread. The Pokédex states that Parasect releases spores wherever it goes, infecting other Pokémon, animals, and even entire forests. These spores can travel through the air, attaching to other living beings, and potentially taking control just as they did with Paras. This raises a terrifying thought. If left unchecked, the Parasect fungus could spread endlessly, turning more Pokémon into mindless husks, all under the control of a force that neither thinks nor feels, and certainly doesn't care. How many Pokémon in the wild could already be infected? Could entire ecosystems be quietly consumed by this parasitic plague, with no one even noticing? And what if trainers are unknowingly capturing Pokémon that are no longer truly alive, whose bodies move, but whose minds are long gone? This leads to an even darker question. Could the fungus infect humans? If Parasect spores are as powerful as the Pokédex suggests, there's no reason to believe they would be limited to just Pokémon. Could the fungus spread to humans, overtaking their minds just as it did with Paras? Would they even realize it was happening? Or would they simply wake up one day no longer in control of their own thoughts and actions, their bodies controlled by something else? The most terrifying thought of all, what if it has already happened? The Pokémon world is filled with scientists and trainers who study and work alongside Pokémon, but how many of them truly understand the dangers lurking beneath the surface? How many have unknowingly come into contact with infected Pokémon without recognizing the risk? If Parasect is just one example of a Pokémon controlled by a parasite, what other Pokémon might be suffering the same fate? Could there be other creatures walking among us bodies, moving, eyes empty, their minds long gone. If the infection ever spreads beyond control, what happens when the world is no longer governed by humans and Pokémon, but by the mindless will of the parasite that controls them all? Most Pokémon live in harmony with nature, but what if some have already fallen victim to forces beyond their comprehension? Some Pokémon form peaceful relationships with their environment, even cooperating with other creatures for mutual benefit. However, others are far more sinister, consuming, controlling, and destroying without remorse in order to survive. These aren't just territorial or resource-driven beings. They are pure predators, thriving at the expense of everything around them. Few exemplify this better than Gourgeist. Gourgeist may appear to be a simple ghost, grass-type Pokémon, resembling a living pumpkin with glowing eyes, but, according to its Pokédex entries, it's a true predator. Unlike many ghost-type Pokémon that haunt places or linger in ruins, Gourgeist actively hunts. At night, it roams the streets, singing an eerie, hypnotic melody. This isn't harmless, it's a calculated lure. When someone hears the song and lets their guard down, Gourgeist attacks, wrapping its long, vine-like arms around its prey and slowly squeezing the life out of them. This method is far from quick or merciful. Gourgeist doesn't just kill, it ensures its victims suffer, strangling them gradually. Disturbingly, it takes pleasure in this suffering. The Pokédex notes that it enjoys the fear and pain of its prey, killing not out of necessity, but desire. What's even more horrifying is what Gourgeist seems to feed on. Unlike other ghost Pokémon that draw energy from life force or emotions, Gourgeist thrives on fear and suffering. Each victim not only sustains it physically, but strengthens it emotionally. This turns each attack into something like a ritual, a source of twisted satisfaction. This raises unsettling questions. How many Gourgeist are there? How many people have vanished after following its haunting song into the night? The world is full of travelers, trainers, and researchers who venture into unknown areas. How many have simply disappeared without a trace? Even Gourgeist's appearance is deceptive. While it resembles a plant, there is no clear evolutionary basis for its form. Unlike other grass types, it may not be a true plant at all, but something older and more malevolent, hiding behind a harmless appearance to mask its true nature. If so, what happens to the souls of its victims? Are they merely killed, or are they trapped inside, their energy fueling Gourgeist's endless hunger? Could the light glowing within it be the remnants of those it has consumed, souls flickering like dying candles? The Pokémon world is full of legends about haunted places, lost souls, and shadows that stalk the night. But what if these aren't just stories? What if travelers truly disappear, lured by a song, claimed by something waiting in the dark? Sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones you see, they're the ones you hear calling to you from the distance, with a melody you can't resist. And by the time you realize it, it's already too late. The world also holds eerie locations, places where something feels wrong and the past seems to linger. One of the most unsettling is the strange house in the Unova region. It appears to be nothing more than an abandoned structure, but those who enter quickly learn it is far from empty. In the early days of Pokémon, the development team decided to make Pikachu more expressive and energetic, giving it its signature smile and lightning bolt tail. This redesign aimed to make Pikachu more appealing to a broader audience, and if they hadn't made this change, the branding of Pokémon could have taken an entirely different direction. However, Pikachu's transformation wasn't the only major redesign. Many Pokémon have undergone significant changes during development. One well-known example is Raichu's lost evolution, Gachu. In the early stages, Pikachu was supposed to have 3 evolutionary stages, with Gachu as its final form. This design featured large fangs and horns, giving it a more aggressive appearance compared to Raichu. Ultimately, Game Freak decided to remove Gachu, as it felt too visually overwhelming and would disrupt Pikachu's role as a mascot. Gachu was never included in later games, making it one of the most mysterious Pokémon. The Pokémon world is filled with hidden designs and forgotten concepts, some of which were discarded entirely, while others were reworked and introduced in later generations. Due to this constant cycle of reinvention, it's possible that some of today's Pokémon are based on old ideas that have resurfaced at the right moment. Pokémon, in a sense, evolve not just in the games but throughout their creation. The Pokémon universe is rich with mysteries, some hidden in the game code, others buried in the lore, and some lost to time. One intriguing aspect is the existence of lost Pokémon, which were planned, designed, and even programmed into early versions of the games, but were never intended for players to find. A famous example is Missing No, a glitch Pokémon in Pokémon Red and Blue. Many players know it as a strange block of pixels that appears when the game's code is manipulated, but it wasn't just a mistake. The game's internal data stored Pokémon as numbered entries, but because Game Freak initially planned more Pokémon than the final 151, there were gaps in the data. When the game couldn't retrieve the correct data, it filled those gaps with random, corrupted information, resulting in missing number. Depending on how the game interpreted the missing data, Missing No could appear as an L-shaped block, an Aerodactyl fossil, a Cubbertop skeleton, or even a ghost, which suggests it may have been linked to planned Pokémon that were never finished. This wasn't the only time a Pokémon was removed before release. In the beta versions of Pokémon Gold and Silver, many unused Pokémon designs were found in early demos, with several creatures never making it to the final game. One of the strangest discoveries was Beta Girafarig, which had an eerie design with a full-sized duplicate of its body, creating a two-headed creature. This concept was later reworked into the Girafarig we know today. Another scrapped Pokémon from this era was Katora, an electric tiger cub with an evolution line that included Kerr and Rora. Although their designs and Pokédex entries were created, these Pokémon were removed from the final version of Gold and Silver. Interestingly, elements of Kotora resurfaced years later in Luxray, suggesting that even if a Pokémon is cut, its concept can live on in other forms. Perhaps the most fascinating lost Pokémon is the rumoured Generation 2 evolution of Ditto. In the beta data of Pokémon Gold and Silver, a pink amorphous Pokémon was discovered. It had no official name, but its file placement suggested it was meant to be Ditto's evolution. This raises many questions, such as how Ditto would evolve and whether its transformation abilities would have been enhanced, possibly allowing it to copy Pokémon permanently. Since the evolution was never fully developed, we may never know the answers. These lost Pokémon serve as a reminder that the Pokémon world is constantly evolving, with ideas being created, discarded, and reimagined across generations. Some Pokémon were erased before players could see them, while others exist only as corrupted data, glitches meant never to be encountered. Yet, these lost Pokémon have become legends, proof that even in a world meticulously designed, there are always mysteries lurking.